Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every single possession you cling to, every status you protect, every fleeting pleasure you chase, has turned into dust overnight. The car you polish, the accolades you replay in your mind, the carefully curated identity you display to the world, gone. What remains? Who remains? This scenario is not science fiction. It is a psychological experiment, a mirror forcing us to confront a question we avoid with relentless distraction. What is left of me if everything I think I need disappears? We live in an age of relentless addition. More connections, more content, more noise. The modern condition is not defined by scarcity but by an overdose of abundance. Yet, paradoxically, it is within this abundance that despair often grows strongest. Arthur Schopenhauer once observed, "Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become, and the same is true of fame." In his stark clarity, he reveals the absurdity of the chase, our tendency to endlessly accumulate, yet never to be satisfied. What if, instead of adding, the real transformation comes from subtracting? What if the life-altering breakthrough begins not when we possess more, but when we are willing to embrace less? This is not the aesthetic minimalism of sleek furniture or curated wardrobes. This is a more radical simplicity, one that shakes the very foundation of our psychological being. Consider the way we organize our days. Notifications dictate our rhythms, obligations structure our hours, and behind it all lurks the gnawing sense of insufficiency. No matter how many tasks we accomplish, how many goals we check off, there is always another dangling ahead, mocking us with the illusion of fulfillment. And so, we become prisoners not of scarcity but of too much. The paradox is almost unbearable. The more we acquire, the less space we seem to have for ourselves. The fuller our lives become, the emptier we feel. We drown in excess, and yet, when someone suggests simplicity, we recoil as if it were poverty, deprivation, or loss. But what if the very thing we resist is the key to freedom? Schopenhauer's philosophy confronts us with the raw edges of existence. He saw life not as a celebration of boundless possibilities, but as a struggle against an insatiable will. A will that uses us like puppets, always driving us toward the next desire, the next conquest, the next solution that never truly solves anything. To embrace simplicity, then, is not just an aesthetic choice, it is an act of rebellion against the tyranny of this will. It is saying, "No, I refuse to let the endless chase define me." But rebellion is never easy. To strip away illusions is to encounter the void they were hiding. When we quiet the noise, silence can feel unbearable. When we release possessions, identity feels fragile. When we step away from the constant performance, we risk discovering a self we barely recognize. This is why most resist the path of simplicity. It is not comfortable, it is transformative. And transformation always carries pain. Yet, within this pain lies the seed of something extraordinary, a clarity so profound it changes the way we see everything. Simplicity is not the reduction of life. It is the unveiling of its essence. So ask yourself, if everything fell away, every possession, every badge of honor, every borrowed identity, what truth would remain? Would you collapse into nothingness? Or would you finally discover the strength of being? This is where our journey begins. Not in the comforts of accumulation, but in the stark, unsettling possibility that when you truly embrace the simple, everything changes. If we strip away the ornaments of life, what do we actually confront? It is not only the external clutter, the overstuffed closets, the endless digital feeds, the appointments inked into calendars, that burdens us. The deeper, more insidious weight lies within. The constant agitation of desire. Desire at its root is restless. It whispers that what you are is not enough, that what you have is not enough, that the moment before you is not enough. Like a parasite, it feeds on dissatisfaction, ensuring that fulfillment always hovers a few steps away, shimmering like a mirage across a desert. The human being, then, is trapped in a cycle of longing and brief satisfaction, only to long again. Schopenhauer, uncompromising in his assessment, described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. And he was right. Consider your own experience. The anticipation of desire brings tension, a hunger gnawing at the nerves. The brief satisfaction of attainment dissolves almost immediately, leaving behind either the next craving or the dull ache of boredom. This cycle is not an occasional misfortune. It is the structure of existence itself. But here lies the paradox. The very thing that animates us, that seems to give us purpose, the pursuit of goals, ambitions, pleasures, is also the mechanism that ensures we are never at peace. To embrace simplicity is to recognize this pattern, to stop playing the game that was designed for you to lose. Yet doing so is not an act of passivity. It requires courage to stand still in a world that worships movement, to abstain when culture glorifies consumption, to be quiet when noise is equated with relevance. Ask yourself, how much of your life is animated not by authentic need, but by the projections of society, the silent expectations of others, the invisible scripts handed down by culture? We are told to strive, to accumulate, to achieve, but we are rarely told to be. And being is precisely what simplicity reclaims. In simplicity, one does not escape existence but enters it more fully. Without the constant pressure of the next desire, the ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary. A quiet morning light through the window, a conversation without agenda, the unforced rhythm of breath. Things we normally overlook because they lack the glamour of acquisition suddenly shine with meaning. But here's the danger. Simplicity cannot be faked. If we renounce possessions with the secret hope of gaining a new form of superiority, if we declutter only to perform virtue, we are still trapped by the will. True simplicity must be radical. It requires letting go not only of the objects we cling to but of the inner craving that clings to them. This letting go is not annihilation. It is liberation. It frees us from the enemy within, the insatiable will that insists happiness always lies just beyond reach. And yet, to take this step means to risk losing the very narratives we use to justify our existence. We cling to our ambitions not only because they promise reward, but because without them, we fear being confronted with a terrifying silence. Who am I, if not my desires? The answer is not given easily. It must be lived. And here is where philosophy is no longer abstract, it becomes survival. Simplicity offers not escape, but a return. A return to the ground of being before desire twisted it into endless pursuit. As we move deeper into this exploration, we will confront the hardest truth. Simplicity is not merely about choosing less, but about seeing differently. It is a shift in consciousness itself. Because when desire loosens its grip, the very structure of reality begins to change. When desire falls silent, even for a moment, the world begins to look unfamiliar. It is as if a veil lifts, and what we once regarded as ordinary is revealed in its raw, unadorned intensity. Simplicity does not impoverish our vision, it amplifies it. Think of how we normally move through life. Our perception is instrumental, shaped by utility. What can this do for me? How can this advance my goals? Even beauty is often reduced to consumption. A landscape is valuable if it is Instagram-worthy. A meal is judged by how well it photographs. In this mode of seeing, reality is never allowed to simply be. It is constantly bent toward our desires. But in simplicity, perception shifts from utility to presence. A leaf trembling in the wind, a child's laughter drifting through a street, the quiet hum of evening. These are not background noise, but living phenomena worthy of attention in themselves. We realize that life's richness does not lie in accumulation but in attunement. To see clearly, without the haze of wanting, is to be pierced by the immediacy of existence. This clarity is unsettling at first, because it strips away our familiar illusions. Without the filter of desire, we can no longer pretend that things are more than what they are. And yet, paradoxically, this very stripping away gives birth to awe. For the simplest fact, that there is something rather than nothing, is the most astonishing fact of all. The philosopher Martin Heidegger once wrote, "To let that which shows itself be seen from itself in the very way in which it shows itself." Though writing in a different tradition, his words echo the same insight. When we embrace simplicity, we allow reality to speak without distortion. Life ceases to be an endless chase for meaning outside itself and begins to reveal meaning in its very presence. Of course, this shift in vision is not automatic. It demands discipline, the courage to resist distraction, the willingness to encounter silence without running, the patience to stay with what appears trivial until its hidden depth is revealed. Modern life trains us to skim the surface of things, to consume experiences at the speed of scrolling. Simplicity trains us to linger, to dwell, to notice. And with noticing comes transformation. Suddenly, relationships take on a new texture. When we are not calculating what someone can provide us, we begin to see them as they are, mysterious, fragile, radiant in their particularity. Work, too, changes character. Stripped of the pressure to be merely a means to an end, tasks once deemed menial can carry a quiet dignity, because they participate in the fabric of living itself. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurs within our sense of time. Desire always projects us into the future, dangling satisfaction just ahead. Simplicity brings us back into the present, not as a motivational slogan, but as an existential reality. When we are no longer enslaved to the chase, time ceases to be a corridor leading elsewhere and becomes a dwelling place in itself. Imagine a day where hours are not hunted down like prey but unfold like a river. Imagine walking without rushing, eating without distraction, speaking without rehearsing what comes next. This is not laziness, nor withdrawal. It is an intensification of life, where each moment deepens instead of being merely spent. And yet, here we must tread carefully. Simplicity is not romantic escapism. It does not deny suffering, nor does it pretend that the world's harshness vanishes with slower breathing. What it offers is the strength to face suffering without the added torment of restless craving. It teaches us to see both joy and sorrow in their naked form, without trying to convert them into something else. This is the vision that emerges when we embrace the simple. A vision where reality, no longer filtered through desire, reveals itself as astonishingly sufficient. But this vision is not the end of the journey, it is only the beginning. Because once perception changes, the question follows: how then shall we live? Once perception shifts, action can no longer remain the same. To see life without the distortions of restless desire is to be confronted with a new responsibility, to live in alignment with that vision. And this is where simplicity moves from an inner orientation to a way of being in the world. But what does it mean to live simply? The danger here is to reduce the idea to slogans or lifestyles. A smaller house, fewer possessions, minimalistic decor. These choices may point in the right direction, but they are surface reflections of something deeper. True simplicity reshapes the very structure of how we act, relate, and choose. First, it reshapes our relationship with time. Simplicity refuses to treat time as a commodity to be optimized. Instead, it treats time as life itself. The frantic schedules, the endless multitasking, the compulsive productivity. These are the symptoms of enslavement to the will, not signs of vitality. To live simply is to reclaim time as a field of presence, where what matters is not how much is done, but how deeply it is lived. Second, it transforms our relationships. When we are no longer fixated on what others can give us, validation, security, advantage, we begin to encounter them as ends in themselves. This changes everything. Love becomes less a contract of mutual fulfillment and more a recognition of another's existence as intrinsically valuable. Friendship ceases to be a network of utility and becomes a shared dwelling in the present. Even conflict, when stripped of ego's endless demands, can be met with a clearer, more compassionate strength. Third, simplicity alters our work. Instead of laboring under the illusion that success will finally silence the will, we learn to treat work as participation in the unfolding of life itself. The humblest task can take on dignity when approached without the fever of acquisition. Sweeping a floor, writing a sentence, growing a garden. None of these need to be stepping stones to something else. They can be complete in themselves. This does not mean ambition dies. It means ambition is purified. We no longer strive in order to inflate the fragile ego, but because creating, building, and offering are themselves expressions of life. Simplicity does not kill excellence. It grounds it in authenticity. Yet perhaps the most profound transformation lies in freedom. Normally, we think of freedom as the ability to choose without restriction. But in truth, this kind of freedom often enslaves us further, as the endless proliferation of choices multiplies our restlessness. Simplicity reveals a deeper freedom, the freedom from the compulsion to choose endlessly. When the will loosens its grip, the horizon of life narrows not into deprivation, but into focus. And within that focus, our actions acquire a power they never had before. This is why simplicity is not passive resignation. It is not about retreating from the world or refusing responsibility. It is about acting with precision instead of compulsion, with clarity instead of confusion. It is about refusing to be scattered across 1,000 meaningless pursuits and instead aligning ourselves with what genuinely matters. Epicurus, often misunderstood as a hedonist, spoke a truth that resonates here. If you wish to make a man wealthy, do not give him more money. Rather, reduce his desires. Wealth, then, is not measured in possessions, but in the liberation from needing them. Simplicity is that wealth, an inexhaustible abundance that requires nothing to sustain itself. But living this way is not without resistance. Society thrives on restless consumption. To embrace simplicity is to move against the current, to risk misunderstanding, even ridicule. People may see it as laziness, failure, or withdrawal. Yet beneath those judgments lies a deeper fear, that your clarity will expose their confusion, your freedom will reveal their chains. And so, the challenge is not only to see differently but to persist in living differently, even when the world insists on pulling you back into its frantic orbit. Because to live simply is not just to find peace, it is to embody a quiet revolution. When we follow simplicity to its deepest depths, we encounter something even more radical than a new lifestyle or calmer days. We encounter a transformation in the very way existence discloses itself. What begins as a stripping away of possessions, distractions, and desires evolves into a confrontation with the core of human life: suffering, meaning, and freedom. Schopenhauer, often called the philosopher of pessimism, never sugarcoated the reality of suffering. For him, life was inevitably marked by pain, frustration, and loss, because the will, the endless drive within us, never rests. Yet, paradoxically, his bleak vision holds a hidden doorway. By recognizing suffering as intrinsic to existence, he forces us to seek a freedom that does not depend on erasing suffering but on transcending the restless will that magnifies it. Simplicity, then, is not merely about making life lighter. It is about altering the relationship between self and suffering. When we no longer chase endless desires, suffering loses part of its sting. Hunger without craving is simply sensation. Loss without clinging is grief, but not annihilation. Pain without endless resistance becomes a raw fact, not a consuming narrative. We cannot abolish suffering, but we can strip it of the chains that bind us to despair. And with that stripping comes meaning. Most of us are taught to hunt for meaning in achievement, recognition, or legacy. But these are fragile forms of meaning, forever vulnerable to loss. Simplicity reveals a quieter, more enduring source: the act of being itself. To sit in the presence of life without demanding it be more than it is, that is meaning. To witness existence as sufficient in its rawness, even when shadowed by sorrow, that is depth. This does not mean indifference. Simplicity does not harden us against the world. It softens us. When we are no longer consumed by our private obsessions, we become open to the lives of others. Compassion deepens, not because we have solved suffering, but because we recognize it as the shared fabric of existence. In simplicity, love expands not as possession or demand, but as solidarity with all that is fleeting, fragile, and finite. Here lies the profound reversal. What we once feared as loss becomes liberation. By embracing the simple, we discover that we never needed as much as we thought. The world, stripped of excess, is not barren. It is luminous. The simple meal tastes richer. The ordinary moment feels eternal. The small act of kindness radiates beyond measure. And perhaps this is what it truly means when we say, everything changes. The world itself has not altered, but our mode of being within it has. Suffering remains, but no longer reigns. Time passes, but no longer enslaves. Existence continues, but no longer confuses us with the illusion that salvation lies elsewhere. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once declared, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." His words echo Schopenhauer's and extend into our own restless age. When we want less, the world itself becomes greater. When we release the grip of craving, life returns to us, not as something to conquer, but as something to receive. And so, the journey we began with a simple question, what remains when everything is stripped away, ends with an answer that is both unsettling and liberating. What remains is being itself. What remains is presence. What remains is a life no longer distorted by the endless pursuit of more, but grounded in the unshakable sufficiency of enough. To truly embrace the simple is not to retreat from existence, but to step into its deepest truth. And in that truth, everything, perception, action, suffering, meaning changes. Not because life becomes easier, but because, for the first time, we are able to live it.